While millions adored Diahann Carroll as the fierce Dominique Devereaux, few knew the painful truth of the woman behind the fame. How did a woman with a $20 million fortune and a career that made history end up surrounded by silence and shadows? Once celebrated as Hollywood royalty, Diahann Carroll faced jealous lovers, broken promises, and loneliness that no amount of fame could erase. Her legendary net worth couldn't protect her from the tragedies that unfolded in private. Now what remains of her estate offers eerie clues to the struggles she fought to keep hidden. Why did this icon's final years feel so empty? What truths lie buried in the ruins of her abandoned home? Let's step inside the world she left behind, a world of old-school glamour, forgotten rooms, and unanswered questions. Diahann Carroll, born Carroll Diahann Johnson, came into the world on July 17, 1935, in the Bronx, New York. Her father, John Johnson, worked as a subway conductor, while her mother, Mabel, was a nurse. Both were respectable, hard-working people, but they were young and still eager to enjoy life. After Diahann's birth, they longed for the excitement of city living, the fine clothes, the social outings, and the comforts of a middle-class lifestyle they felt they hadn't yet experienced as a couple. As an infant, Diahann was demanding in ways typical of any baby. She cried often, needed constant care, and like all children, brought expenses that her parents weren't prepared for at the time. The strain became too much, and so seeking relief, John and Mabel made the difficult decision to send their baby daughter to live with an aunt in North Carolina. Freed from the responsibilities of parenthood, John and Mabel settled into their desired life. When they felt they'd had enough time to enjoy themselves, they sent for Diahann and brought her back to New York. By then, the family had made a home in Harlem, and it was there that Diahann grew up. Perhaps out of guilt for having left her behind, or simply out of deep affection, John and Mabel doted on their daughter. Diahann was spoiled and adored. Her parents called her their princess, and she truly was treated like one, especially by her father, who cherished her beyond measure. But as with many things, too much of this treatment had consequences. The indulgence and constant attention, though given with love, are said to have shaped traits in Diahann that would bring challenges later in her life. As she grew older, Diahann attended music and arts high school, where she crossed paths with future stars like Billy D. Williams. A model student, she excelled with the full support of her parents. They encouraged her to pursue every opportunity, singing lessons, dancing lessons, anything that might help their daughter shine. And shine she did. By age 15, Diahann was already modeling for Ebony magazine. But neither Diahann nor her parents were content with just that. They dreamed of seeing her on the big screen. Eager to help her break into television and film, they urged her to enter talent competitions. One of those was Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scout, a show similar in spirit to what America's Got Talent or American Idol. After graduating from high school, Diahann Carroll briefly enrolled at New York University. But it didn't take long for her to realize that the academic path wasn't where her heart was. She spoke openly with her parents and told them she wanted to pursue a career in show business. With their support, she began auditioning for anything she could find: talent shows, short films, plays, determined to make her mark. It was one of those talent shows that changed everything. On January 8, 1954, Diahann stepped onto the stage of Chance of a Lifetime. Dressed with grace and carrying herself with the poise of a princess, she sang with all her heart. The judges were impressed, and when the night ended, she didn't just win the top prize. She walked away with $1,000 in her pocket. Chance of a Lifetime operated much like American Idol decades later. After that first win, Diahann faced new challengers week after week. Some would look at her with confidence, convinced they could beat her. But by the end of each show, it was Diahann who remained, while others left in tears. She won 4 weeks in a row, untouchable and unstoppable. As word of her talent spread, real opportunities began to arrive. And they weren't small gigs at rundown clubs. Diahann was offered contracts at prestigious venues like Manhattan's famed Café Society, a spot known for drawing in the city's elite, where fortunes were flaunted and the atmosphere oozed glamour. But despite her undeniable vocal talent, Diahann struggled to connect with the nightclub crowd. When she took the stage, she carried herself with elegance, but came across as stiff, too polished, too careful. The audience wanted more than just a beautiful voice. They craved someone who could command the stage with sensuality and charisma, someone who could captivate with every move. Performers like Dorothy Dandridge, Lena Horne, and Hazel Scott had mastered that balance. Diahann, for all her gifts, never quite fit into that mold. For reasons that still puzzle some, Diahann Carroll's manager, despite knowing she hadn't exactly dazzled on the nightclub scene, encouraged her to audition for Carmen Jones. Diahann walked into the office for her audition, where director Otto Preminger sized her up almost instantly. He had no interest in casting her as Carmen. In fact, it's said he dismissed the idea outright, but before sending her on her way, he did offer her a chance at a smaller part. At first, Diahann was excited, but her enthusiasm faded when she learned what the role actually was: a minor character who played sidekick to Pearl Bailey's character, who herself was a sidekick to Carmen Jones, played by the dazzling Dorothy Dandridge. In short, Diahann's part was little more than an extra to an extra. She had a few lines, but it wasn't a role that left much of an impression. Still, luck was on Diahann's side. Carmen Jones turned out to be a massive success, earning rave reviews and bringing attention to everyone involved, including Diahann. While it didn't lead to immediate film offers, it did open the door for her to land a leading role in the Broadway musical House of Flowers, where she once again shared the stage with Pearl Bailey. Diahann's performance was so strong, she earned a Tony Award nomination. A few years later, Diahann crossed paths with Dorothy Dandridge once more, this time competing for the role of Bess in Porgy and Bess. Dorothy won the part, but by then Diahann had learned not to dwell on such setbacks. More film roles followed, but it was television that truly transformed Diahann's career. In 1968, she was cast as the star of Julia, a groundbreaking series that made her one of America's most beloved TV figures. As Julia, she portrayed a widowed nurse, a smart, kind, and determined single mother navigating life and work. The show broke stereotypes and helped humanize black women on television. While Julia had already made Diahann Carroll a household name, it was the film Claudine that truly cemented her place as one of the most respected black actresses of her time. Claudine wasn't the kind of glossy musical role filled with singing, dancing, and smiling for the cameras. This was something raw and real. Diahann stepped into the character of a struggling single mother in Harlem, raising 6 children and navigating the harsh realities of poverty, love, and survival. The role demanded true acting skill, and Diahann delivered. Despite coming from a privileged background, having grown up as a cherished only child, spoiled by parents who treated her like royalty, she managed to bring authenticity to Claudine's struggles. She didn't know that world firsthand, but on screen, she made audiences believe that she did. The emotions she conveyed felt genuine, and her performance earned widespread praise. Claudine pushed her to A-list status among black actors and proved she could handle complex dramatic roles with depth and grace. Of course, with rising fame came whispers and rumors, some dating all the way back to her childhood. One persistent story claimed that Diahann had been a snob as a child. According to this version, dressed in the finest clothes and treated like a princess by her doting parents, she would go to school looking down her nose at the other kids. But there was another version of the story, too. That the other children only thought she was a snob because they were jealous of how polished and well-dressed she always appeared. Whichever story was true, the outcome was the same. Diahann faced the consequences of being different. There's a tale of a day at school when shouts and chaos erupted in the hallway. Teachers and students rushed out of their classrooms to find Diahann being dragged and beaten by another girl who struck her again and again before pulling out handfuls of Diahann's hair. Another rumor came from her early modeling days. When Ebony magazine reached out for an interview, Diahann arrived dressed to the nines, almost too dressed. Her mother had decked her out in a lace summer hat with a veil, a big, poofy taffeta dress, and lace gloves. The look was so over the top that people at Ebony struggled to hold in their laughter. Some whispered and pointed as she sat there, looking more like Little Bo Peep than a modern model ready for the spotlight. Another story from Diahann Carroll's early career centers around her time on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scout. According to rumor, one day Arthur Godfrey invited Diahann and her mother backstage, but instead of showing respect, he began making crude, inappropriate jokes, remarks about Diahann's mother that were laced with racial undertones, including a tasteless comment about how he imagined her black skin would taste like chocolate milk. Though he tried to pass it off as humor, it crossed the line. Diahann, young but poised, didn't let it slide. She reportedly spoke up, calmly telling him that her mother didn't appreciate those kinds of remarks. The words caught Godfrey off guard. He turned red with embarrassment and quickly excused himself. Still, he kept Diahann on the show, perhaps respecting the dignity with which she handled the situation. There's also talk about Diahann's audition for Carmen Jones. She was trying out for the lead role of Carmen, reading opposite James Edwards, who was auditioning for the part of Joe, a role that ultimately went to Harry Belafonte. It's said that Diahann's nerves got the better of her during the romantic scenes. Whenever the dialogue or stage directions called for intimacy, whether a kiss or a tender moment, she'd dissolve into nervous giggles, like a shy schoolgirl. The laughter threw off both of their auditions. James Edwards was reportedly frustrated that she derailed the opportunity for both of them. Still, Edwards didn't hold it against her for long. Charismatic and confident, he used his charm to draw Diahann into a relationship. He was smooth, well-spoken, and carried himself with authority, qualities that fascinated Diahann. But once he had her attention, the relationship took a darker turn. According to gossip, Edwards began to manipulate her, testing how far she would go to please him. He allegedly asked for gifts, demanded favors, and took advantage of her affection, all while he was still married. Over time, his requests became more about control than desire. One story describes how he invited Diahann to meet him at a hotel. When she arrived, he told her to take off her clothes. Nervous and eager to please, she obeyed, waiting for what might come next. But instead of joining her, Edwards simply watched, then left without a word. It's said she waited there, alone and vulnerable, for hours, a sign of just how deeply he had gotten into her head. Despite moments like this, Diahann continued to see him, until she crossed paths with another man, Monty Kaye, a casting director. Diahann fell for Monty, though her family, especially her father, disapproved. Still, that didn't stop her. In 1956, she married him, hoping for a fresh start. While Diahann Carroll's father had his concerns about Monty Kaye, some say he was worrying about the wrong person. According to gossip, it wasn't Monty who brought the trouble into the marriage. It was Diahann. Stories describe her as so spoiled and demanding that she exhausted Monty emotionally. She expected his attention at every moment, wanted constant gifts, endless compliments, and seemed to believe their life together should play out like a fairy tale where she was the princess at the center of it all. The strain showed early on. During their honeymoon, Monty supposedly asked for just an hour alone in another room so he could finish reading a book he had been enjoying. But Diahann didn't take it well. Instead of giving him space, she reportedly threw a dramatic fit, rolling on the bed, pulling at her hair, banging on the walls. Monty, stunned by the scene, tried to comfort her, asking what was wrong. Her reply: she couldn't understand why he'd want to spend even an hour away from her. Monty gave in, but heartbreak was waiting down the line. While filming Porgy and Bess, Diahann met Sidney Poitier, and the connection was immediate. She was drawn to his confidence, his charm, the way he commanded attention wherever he went. People admired him. Even powerful white men showed him respect, and that only made him more magnetic in her eyes. Sidney, with his natural grace and commanding presence, caught her looking. When he finally spoke to her, it was as if he knew right then that she wanted him. At that moment, Sidney had a choice. He could have seen how vulnerable Diahann was and left things alone, or he could seize the opportunity. Sidney made his decision. Diahann Carroll became his newest pursuit, and he intended to savor it. Before long, people began to notice that Diahann Carroll and Sidney Poitier were slipping away from the crowd for private conversations. What started as innocent moments shared in quiet corners soon turned into something far more intimate. Despite the polished image of the 1950s and 60s that many like to romanticize, imagining those years as neat and proper like a scene from a movie, behind closed doors, things were just as messy and complicated as they are today. Sidney, still married, would come to Diahann quickly and leave just as fast, always needing to get back home to his wife. And Diahann, married to Monty Kay at the time, knew full well that what they were doing was destructive. But neither of them seemed to care. Diahann fell hard. She became completely enamored with Sidney, like a schoolgirl swept off her feet. Within weeks, she was so taken with him that she went home to Monty and admitted the unthinkable. She told him she was in love with Sidney Poitier and wanted a divorce. When Diahann shared this with Sidney, he must have been caught off guard. Maybe deep down he thought, "What is she doing?" But instead of pulling away, he played into it. He told her he loved her too, but said it wasn't the right time for him to leave his wife. If she could just wait a little longer, he promised, they would be together and eventually marry. Diahann was heartbroken that Sidney wasn't ready to leave his marriage. Feeling lost, she rushed back to Monty, telling him she had made a terrible mistake and that it was him she truly loved. Monty forgave her, and their reconciliation was intense. The two rekindled their passion with a burst of renewed love and energy, and before long, Diahann became pregnant. Rumors swirled in Black Hollywood, with some whispering that the child belonged to Sidney, but most accepted that the baby was Monty's. Monty, relieved to have his wife and soon a family, had no idea that Diahann was still emotionally tied to Sidney. She hadn't truly let him go. And Sidney? He didn't hide his frustration. He reportedly told Diahann again and again that she should leave Monty, insisting that she belonged to him and that it angered him to know Monty had fathered her child. But Diahann held her ground. She wasn't going to leave Monty unless Sidney was willing to leave his wife first. For a man like Sidney Poitier, who, according to many, had a controlling streak, Diahann's refusal to leave Monty unless he left his own wife wasn't something he could easily accept. So, Sidney decided to take control of the situation himself. At the time, he and Diahann were working together on the film Paris Blues. During filming, Monty came by to visit his wife. As Diahann stepped away to greet him, Sidney made his move. He walked straight up to Monty, looked him in the eye, and reportedly said, "Listen, Monty, this needs to stop. I'm in love with your wife, and she's in love with me. You should do the right thing, divorce her, because I'm going to divorce my wife and marry Diahann." Standing nearby, Diahann didn't intervene. In fact, witnesses say she was completely swept up in the moment, charmed by Sidney's boldness. She watched quietly as Sidney laid claim to her in front of her own husband, touched perhaps by the idea of being wanted so openly. But what she didn't see was the deeper motive. Sidney's confrontation wasn't about love, it was about control. He didn't want Monty touching Diahann anymore. This was about possession, not devotion, and it worked. Monty, humiliated and likely heartbroken, walked away. He had been publicly shamed by a man more famous, more confident, and in that moment, more ruthless. Whatever affection he may have still had for Diahann was buried under embarrassment. He let her go. After the marriage fell apart, Diahann moved into a luxurious apartment that Sidney provided for her and her daughter. On the surface, life looked good. She and Sidney were now a couple, seemingly happy. They shared passionate moments, and when Sidney would leave, she'd send him off with a kiss, asking him to return quickly. But there was always a catch. Sidney still had a family. He hadn't left his wife. When Diahann brought it up, he continued to reassure her. "I will," he told her. "We'll be married. Just wait." And she waited. It wasn't until 1965, years after the affair had started, that Sidney finally divorced his wife. But by then, much more had changed than just his marital status. Once Sidney Poitier was finally single, everything changed. Now that he no longer had a wife, all the women who had once admired him from a distance, too respectful or cautious to get involved while he was married, saw their chance. And Sidney wasn't about to pass up the attention. The idea of settling down with Diahann, after years of having his freedom and options, wasn't exactly at the top of his list anymore. He kept stringing Diahann along with excuse after excuse. Eventually, she grew tired of waiting, tired of the promises that led nowhere. She began to see other men, hoping to move on with her life. But it didn't take much, just a date or two, before Sidney found out and exploded with jealousy. He called her names, accused her of betrayal, and made it clear he wasn't going to stand for it. To Sidney, Diahann was still his woman, and that possessiveness pulled Diahann right back into his web. She convinced herself it was because he loved her so deeply. After nearly 9 years of this back and forth, Diahann finally gave Sidney an ultimatum. If they weren't going to marry, she said, she was done. But Sidney's response was as shocking as it was cruel. He told her he couldn't imagine marrying her until they had lived together without her daughter. He suggested the child move out for 6 months so they could see what life would be like without distractions. What he was really asking was for Diahann to choose him over her child, and likely hoping that in that time he could convince her to give up the girl for good. Thankfully, Diahann refused. She chose her daughter. But when she returned home from spending a joyful day out with the child, she found the apartment doors locked. Sidney had thrown her out, and when she called him in confusion, he demanded she repay everything: the apartment, the clothes, the gifts, the car, every cent he'd ever spent on her. It said that Diahann was heartbroken, unable to believe that after all those years, Sidney could cast her aside so easily. But she agreed, repaid him, and walked away. You'd think she might have taken time to heal, but according to gossip, she didn't. Before long, Diahann was dating Don Marshall, another man who exuded power and charm at first. But it didn't take long before his true colors showed. What had seemed like strength turned into belittling. He began criticizing her success, questioning why she was paid so well for Julia, and making her feel small out of jealousy. One day, Diahann Carroll had finally had enough of Don Marshall's put-downs and controlling ways. With the confidence of Dominique Devereaux herself, she stood tall, looked him in the eye, and told him she was leaving. She was done with the disrespect. Without waiting for a response, she gathered her daughter and walked out, determined to reclaim her peace. But the next day, when she returned to collect more of her things, ready to deliver another calm, decisive speech, things took a dark and terrifying turn. There was no dramatic scene like in a movie. This was real life, and Don Marshall's true nature came through. Instead of listening, he lashed out. He hit her repeatedly, all the while threatening to ruin her face, accusing her of thinking too highly of herself. It was a brutal, sobering moment. Diahann realized then that this wasn't just a toxic relationship. It was dangerous. She took her daughter and left for good, determined never to look back. After Don Marshall, Diahann tried to find happiness again, marrying Fred Glusman. But within 2 months, his charm faded, replaced by mistreatment. The marriage didn't last. She ended it before it could bring more harm. Not long after, another strange chapter began. During a flight, Diahann struck up a pleasant conversation with the man sitting behind her, Robert DeLeon, an editor at Jet magazine. But what she didn't know at the time was that Robert hadn't just ended up behind her by coincidence. According to whispers, he'd been deliberately placing himself in her path for some time, always finding a way to be near her, unnoticed until that flight. Some even claimed he'd been quietly stalking her. If that was true, his persistence paid off. Diahann and Robert married in 1975. Almost immediately, Robert seemed to shift. He decided his old car wasn't good enough and started spending Diahann's money on luxuries, fancy suits, a flashy Ferrari, and a mansion in an upscale neighborhood. He quit his job at Jet, claiming he planned to start his own business. But the money wasn't coming in. He was spending hers. Robert struggled with being seen as Mr. Diahann Carroll rather than standing on his own. The insecurity fueled his drinking, and ultimately he died in a car crash. The loss hit Diahann hard, plunging her into depression, and she too began drinking to cope. Later, while working on Dynasty, Diahann met Vic Damone. She fell for him and their romance blossomed. But soon, Vic's finances began to crumble. Bills piled up, and he couldn't keep up. Diahann stepped in, covering his debts, including paying off his beautiful house in Palm Springs, all before they were even married. Despite it all, Diahann went on to marry Vic, hoping for lasting love. After Diahann Carroll married Vic Damone, their relationship followed a pattern that seemed all too familiar. As Vic's career declined, while Diahann's continued to soar, his insecurities began to show. The more successful she became, the more bitter he grew. His jealousy ate away at their marriage, and he started to treat her with resentment because of it. There's a story that during one of Diahann's performances, whether she was in a stage production or on the set of Dynasty, she had wanted Vic to come see her work. But he refused. Instead, one of Vic's friends called her, and rather than offering support, had the nerve to suggest that she was the problem. "Diahann, you have to look at it from Vic's perspective," the friend said. "When he drives through Hollywood and sees billboards with your face on them, it makes him feel less than a man. Maybe if you asked them to take those down, he'd come visit you." But Vic's jealousy didn't stop at her career. He became suspicious of other men, accusing her of being unfaithful. One rumor claims he even went so far as to involve their accountant in his schemes. Allegedly, he told the man to lure Diahann into a private meeting and make advances, just to see how she would react. When Diahann met with the accountant, she had no idea what was coming. The moment she got in the car, the man started trying to kiss and touch her. Confused and shocked, she pushed him away, only for him to claim, "It's okay. Vic said this was fine." Diahann managed to fend him off, scratching his face in the process, and rushed home to confront her husband. "So you tried to set me up with the accountant?" she demanded. "Well, it didn't work. I didn't sleep with him. Did I pass your test?" But Vic wasn't satisfied. Grabbing her by the arm, he said coldly, "No, you didn't pass." "Why did you meet with him in the first place? Didn't you think it was strange he wanted to see you alone?" Their marriage limped along, filled with more downs than ups, until they finally divorced in 1997. Of course, not all the drama in Diahann's life came from her marriages. There are stories about her clashes with Pearl Bailey during their time in House of Flowers. It said Pearl would steal lines, grab moments meant for Diahann, and even performed a song that Diahann was supposed to sing, leaving her standing there, humiliated. Another tale, one that surfaced in the comments of a YouTube video, claims that Marlon Brando once got too familiar with Diahann, putting his hand on her behind. Diahann, not one to tolerate disrespect, reportedly slapped him so hard across the face that it left a mark. And then there's the story of her beloved Rolls-Royce. Determined to maintain a certain image, Diahann kept that car long past its prime. The leather was worn and peeling, the seats had permanent indentations, and the car had its share of mechanical issues. But trading it in for something more modest wasn't an option. The car was part of the image she wanted to protect. In her later years, Diahann continued to act, though no longer in leading roles. She took on supporting parts, remaining a respected figure in the industry. In 1997, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, but thankfully, it went into remission. Sadly, on October 4, 2019, Diahann Carroll passed away at the age of 84, after battling cancer again, along with dementia. At the time of her passing, Diahann Carroll had amassed a net worth estimated at $20 million. Throughout her career as an actress, singer, and model, she broke barriers and set new standards, not only for her talent but also for the success she achieved in an industry that often tried to limit her. Back in the 1970s, Carroll's earnings were especially impressive. For her acclaimed role in Claudine, 1974, she earned a salary of $600,000, a significant sum at the time, particularly for a black actress. Earlier in her career, when she appeared in Carmen Jones, 1954, she received $1,000 for her part as Mert, showing just how far she rose over the decades. Diahann's home reflected the elegance and glamour that defined her public persona. She lived for many years in a luxurious condominium in the iconic Sierra Towers building in West Hollywood. This high-rise, known for housing celebrities, offered sweeping views of the city, modern amenities, and a level of privacy that stars like Carroll valued deeply. Her unit was sophisticated yet warm, a space filled with personal touches and pieces that spoke to her taste and legacy. From a Steinway grand baby piano to sculptures by renowned artists like Artist Lane, every item in her home hinted at the life of a woman who appreciated art, music, and beauty. After her death, the condo was listed for $4.2 million, later reduced to $3.995 million as it lingered on the market. Today, it stands as a symbol of old-school Hollywood charm, a place where Carroll once hosted friends, practiced lines, and found respite from the spotlight. The estate sale of her belongings, including jewelry, elegant evening gowns, and even her working script from Julia, offered fans and collectors a chance to own a piece of her remarkable story. Her daughter, Suzanne Kay, perhaps summed it up best. Diahann Carroll was a woman who believed she deserved the very best, and her home, her career, and her enduring legacy reflected that truth.